There are words meant to be spoken only once to a soul, and this is such a moment. You did not search for this. Something older than your will brought you here, to this threshold where silence becomes confession, and the unsaid finally takes breath. This is not accident. This is the culmination of every prayer you abandoned halfway, every question you swallowed before it could reach sound, every restlessness that visits you in the hour when the world pretends to sleep. You were summoned here by that ancient ache within you that knows the difference between entertainment and encounter. And when these words complete their passage through you, you will not return. Not because you have forgotten, but because you will have remembered, and what is remembered cannot be unlearned. Let me speak to you of something the world has conspired to make you forget. Though it lives in your marrow and pulses through your silence like a second heartbeat, you were taught to ignore. There is within you a knowing that precedes language, a recognition that comes not from books or teachers, but from some region of yourself that existed before you were given a name, before you were told who you should become. The knowing has been whispering to you all your life, but the noise of survival, the machinery of belonging, the exhausting performance of being acceptable to others turned your attention elsewhere. And so you learned to live as though you were only what the mirror shows, only what can be measured and labeled and explained. But something in you refuses this reduction, something that stirs in the spaces between your obligations, something that makes you pause for no reason in the middle of ordinary days and feel the strangeness of your own existence. The world did not teach you to honor this wildness. The world taught you to fear it, to suppress it, to medicate it into silence with distraction and busyness and the endless pursuit of more. But the wildness remains patient as stone, certain as the return of winter, waiting not for your permission, but for your collapse, for that moment when your strength to pretend finally expires and you are left standing in the ruins of who you thought you were supposed to be. You have felt this, the sensation that your entire life has been a careful avoidance of yourself, a long detour around the very thing you were born to confront. You built your days with great care, selecting each activity, each relationship, each goal as though constructing a wall between yourself and some unnamed danger. But the danger was never outside. The danger was always the possibility that you might finally stop running, might finally turn and face the question that has been pursuing you since you first learned to silence your own intuition. The question is simple, though you have made it complicated through years of evasion. What happens when you stop living as though you need to earn your existence? There was a time, perhaps you barely remember it, when you did not question your right to take up space, to speak, to feel, to simply be without justification. Before the world taught you that love is conditional, that acceptance requires performance, that your value must be proven through ceaseless striving. The innocence of that early time was not naivety, it was truth. But then came the lessons, delivered in 1,000 small moments, each one teaching you that you were not enough as you were, that some essential wrongness lived in your core and needed correction. These lessons came from those who loved you, which made them more devastating. For how do you reject the teachings of those whose approval you most desperately needed? You learned to twist yourself into shapes that might please them, to quiet the parts of yourself that made others uncomfortable, to perform gratitude for the crumbs of conditional affection. You learned that certain feelings were unacceptable, certain thoughts were dangerous, certain truths were better left unspoken. You learned to read the room before you read your own heart, to prioritize harmony over honesty, to become small so others could remain comfortable. The training was so thorough, so pervasive, that eventually you forgot you were performing. The mask became the face. The role became the identity. And the wildness within you, that original knowing, retreated into a silence so deep you began to believe it had never existed at all. But it did exist. It does exist. And it has been calling to you in languages the conscious mind cannot translate, but the body understands perfectly. Why you sometimes feel homesick for a place you have never been. Why certain music moves you to tears, though the lyrics speak of nothing you have experienced. Why you wake at 3 in the morning with your chest tight and your mind racing, unable to name what pursues you through the landscape of sleep. These are not symptoms of disorder. These are symptoms of a soul trying to remember itself, trying to surface through the accumulated layers of who you were told to be. The loneliness you carry is not the absence of people. You may be surrounded by others, connected by 1,000 threads of obligation and history and shared routine. But still the loneliness persists, because what you long for is not company, but recognition. Not conversation, but communion. You long to be seen as you actually are, not as you have learned to present yourself. You long to speak the truth that lives beneath your careful words, to confess the doubts that contradict your smiling face, to reveal the raw edges you have spent years learning to smooth and conceal. But where can such honesty exist when the world has made it clear that your acceptability depends on your ability to seem fine, to cope, to manage, to never need too much or feel too deeply or question too loudly? So you carry on, and the gap between your inner life and your outer presentation grows wider with each passing year. The exhaustion of this double existence seeps into your bones. You become efficient at social performance while feeling increasingly estranged from those you perform for. You speak the expected words while your actual thoughts spiral in directions you dare not share. And the terrible thing, the thing that makes this bearable and unbearable at once, is that you become so skilled at this division that even you forget where the performance ends and the truth begins. The forgetting is not passive. It is an active mercy, a necessary anesthetic that allows you to function in a world that has little patience for the full complexity of human experience. If you remained constantly aware of the gap between who you are and who you pretend to be, the pain would be unendurable. So the psyche, in its wisdom, numbs you. It teaches you to live at a distance from yourself, to experience your own life as though from behind thick glass, present but not participating, going through the motions, while the essential part of you remains untouched and untouchable. Survival, also disappearance. But there are moments when the numbness cracks, moments when something breaks through. Some beauty or sorrow so acute that it bypasses your defenses and strikes directly at the core of you. In these moments, you remember what it feels like to be fully alive, to feel without mediation, to exist without the constant calculation of how your existence will be received by others. These moments are brief. They come uninvited and depart just as suddenly, but they leave behind an ache, a longing, a recognition that what you call your life is only a fraction of what living could be. And once you taste that aliveness, the numbness becomes insufferable, caught between the life you have built and the life that haunts you, the one you sense but cannot quite touch, the one that would require you to become unrecognizable to those who think they know you. The fear of transformation keeps you frozen. You tell yourself the timing is not right, that there are responsibilities to honor, people who depend on the version of you they have come to expect. These are not lies. These are true, but beneath them lives a deeper truth. You are afraid of what you will become if you stop holding yourself in this careful shape, afraid of the judgment that will rain down on you if you suddenly begin to honor what you actually feel instead of what you should feel. Let me tell you something, the world will not. Fear is not evidence that you should remain where you are. Fear is evidence that you have spent so long betraying yourself that fidelity to your own soul feels like treason against everyone else. You have been trained to see self-honoring as selfishness, boundaries as cruelty, your own needs as burdens that must be minimized or apologized for. But the training, however well-intentioned, has left you stranded in a life that fits you like a garment sewn for someone else's body. You can wear it, you have been wearing it, but it chafes and restricts and slowly suffocates the very thing it claims to protect. The path forward is not clarity. It is not a sudden revelation that makes everything simple and clear. It is something more uncomfortable and more true. The willingness to live in the question, to tolerate not knowing, to release your grip on the certainty that has kept you small and safe. A kind of courage the world does not recognize or reward, because it is a courage
that has no external markers, no achievements to point to, no applause to confirm its worthiness. The private courage of sitting with your own discomfort instead of numbing it, of feeling your own fear instead of fleeing it, of choosing honesty over harmony even when the cost is high. And the cost will be high. Some who claim to love you will withdraw when they discover you are not who they needed you to be. Some will accuse you of selfishness, of cruelty, of betrayal. They will not understand that what they experienced as your steadiness
was actually your self-abandonment, that your reliability was purchased at the cost of your vitality. They will ask what happened to you, as though you have become a stranger, when in truth, you are simply becoming yourself for the first time. The misunderstanding will hurt. You will doubt yourself. You will wonder if you are making a terrible mistake, if the old life, for all its constraints, was better than this uncertain freedom. But here is what you must remember in those moments of doubt. The soul cannot be fooled by comfort. It cannot be bribed by security or placated by success. The soul knows the difference between surviving and living, between filling time and inhabiting it fully. And once the soul begins to wake, once it remembers what it feels like to be honored instead of ignored, it will not settle for less, no matter how reasonable the arguments against it. Not stubbornness, integrity, the part of you that loves you more than it fears the opinions of others, that values your aliveness more than your acceptability. The isolation you feel now is not punishment, it is preparation. The stripping away of everything false so that what is true can finally be heard. You thought you needed people around you to prove your worth, to validate your existence, to fill the emptiness you carried. But the emptiness was never meant to be filled from outside. The emptiness is the clearing, the sacred space where your own voice can finally echo without competition. In solitude, you are not alone. You are finally, achingly meeting yourself for the first time. And the meeting is not gentle. Confrontation and recognition at once, the horror of seeing how long you have been missing, and the relief of being found. What you call loneliness is actually the first breath of freedom, the space between who you were and who you are becoming, the gap that must be crossed without guarantees or guides. No one can walk this passage for you. No book can provide the map. No teacher can
translate the language your soul speaks when it finally finds the courage to stop whispering and begin to speak. Your work, your pilgrimage, your descent into the underworld of everything you have been avoiding. And yes, it is terrifying. Yes, it would be easier to turn back, to apologize for disturbing the peace, to resume your place in the story others have written for you. But you cannot. Something has shifted. The crack in your carefully constructed life has widened into a doorway, and you can see through it now to what lies beyond your old limitations. The seeing cannot be undone. You can pretend you don't see. You can busy yourself with distractions. You can build new walls and hope they hold. But beneath it all, you will know. You will know that you chose the cage when the door was open, chose the performance when authenticity was possible, chose the approval of others when your own soul was begging for recognition. The knowledge will poison your old comforts. It will make your compromises taste bitter. It will turn your accomplishments hollow. Because none of it, no matter how impressive or enviable, will answer the question that has been growing louder with each passing day. What happens when you stop trying to be who they need you to be and start discovering who you actually are? And then, in some quiet moment when your defenses are down and your strength to resist has expired, you realize the pain was never chasing you. It was waiting for you to stop running. The fear was never the enemy. It was the guardian at the threshold, testing your readiness to cross into territory where your old identity cannot follow. The emptiness was never absence. It was the vast spaciousness required for something new to be born, something that could never fit into the narrow confines of your previous life. You are not broken. You are breaking open. What you thought was your destruction is actually your liberation, the necessary shattering of a container that has grown too
small for what you carry. The grief you feel is not for who you are becoming, but for who you will never be again, for the innocent belief that you could please everyone, for the exhausting hope that if you just tried harder, loved better, gave more, they would finally see you and love you as you are. The grief is holy. It is the composting of old stories, the fertile soil where new truth can take root. But the new truth will not arrive as certainty. It will come as whisper and intuition, as sudden knowing in your body that bypasses your rational mind, as the growing awareness that some choices make you feel more alive while others drain the color from your days. You will have to learn to trust these subtle signals, to honor the wisdom that speaks in feeling rather than thought, to follow the thread even when you cannot see where it leads. A different kind of intelligence than you were taught to value, one that cannot be measured or proven, one that looks like foolishness to those who
have forgotten how to listen to anything softer than certainty. So here you stand, at a moment that will not come again, reading words that found you not by accident, but by the mysterious mathematics of readiness and recognition. You did not seek this. You were sought. Something in you sent out a signal that these words answered. A prayer you did not know you were praying, a question you had stopped asking because the silence had grown too painful. And now the answer is here, not as solution, but as mirror. Not as comfort, but as confirmation that what you have been sensing is true. You are more than what you have been living, and the time for pretending otherwise is ending. What you do with knowing is yours to choose. You can close this window and return to your careful life, can explain away the stirring as temporary madness or emotional indulgence. The structures you have built are still standing. The role is still available. You can step back into it and no one will blame you.
Because no one knew you had stepped out. The soul's rebellion can be secret, at least for a while. You can continue as before while something within you slowly dies of neglect, slowly forgets the sound of its own voice. Or you can honor what you know, even though the knowing is incomplete and terrifying. You can begin to make space for the truth instead of always accommodating the lie. You can start speaking the words that have been locked in your throat, setting boundaries that will displease people you have spent years trying to please, choosing your own vitality over their comfort. Not a promise of happiness, a promise of authenticity. The fierce, aching beauty of becoming real in a world that rewards performance. Loneliness and liberation, grief and freedom, the death of who you were, and the birth of who you might become if you are brave enough to find out. The soul knows which path you must take. It has always known. It brought you here to remember what you already know but have
been afraid to act upon. These words will fade from your memory. The feeling of recognition will soften. Life will resume its demands and you will be pulled back into the current of your days. But somewhere in you, something has shifted. A seed has been planted in ground you thought was barren. And whether you tend it or ignore it, whether you water it with courage or smother it with fear, its presence will change you. You will not be able to pretend with quite the same conviction. You will not be able to settle with quite the same resignation. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you remember, you cannot forget. Though you may spend years trying, the path back to unconsciousness is closed. The only way forward is through the very thing you have been avoiding, into the truth you have been running from, toward the self you have been too afraid to become. And the journey, solitary and uncertain as it is the only one worth taking. Everything else is just waiting, just marking time, until your strength to resist finally expires and you surrender to what you have always known was inevitable. If something ancient in you recognized these words, write only this: I am awakening now. The soul remembers when pretending finally ends.